Welcome to Spotlight Chronicles. We often look at these iconic performances and wonder what really goes into creating them. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a really revealing interview Sir Anthony Hopkins gave. It was back in May 2018 with The Guardian.
That's right. And this isn't just like a rundown of his career. It's more a chance to understand how his own life, his personal journey, his views on aging and life, how all that stuff sort of came together in his portrayal of King Lear. It's like getting a backstage pass, into the mind of a master actor.
Exactly. And what's great is we're working from this single, incredibly rich interview. It feels like he just, opened up and shared so much really fascinating insights. So let's maybe start by setting the scene a bit. This was 2018. He was 79, and he actually described himself as being happier than ever. What was behind that? What were the ingredients for this contentment?
Well, it sounds like a few things really clicked for him around that time. He spoke very warmly about his wife, Stella, for one, and how she encouraged these other creative sides of him, like his painting and composing music. But beyond that, there seemed to be this sense of inner peace he talked about, like something had settled within him. And yet he still had this real energy, this passion for acting, still loved working.
Yeah, that really comes through. It's quite inspiring, isn't it? That finding purpose isn't tied to a certain age.
Absolutely. And it shows you can find new ways to be creative and fulfilled, anytime, really.
And it's interesting. He was working on other things, a Netflix movie, I think, but he specifically pointed to the BBC's King Lear as bringing him like true happiness, a real sense of accomplishment. That feels significant, especially when you remember he'd played Lear before, much earlier.
Oh, yeah, that's a really key point. He played Lear at the National Theater, must have been when he was 48. And he was very open about feeling, completely out of his depth back then. Floundering, I think, was the word he used.
Right, floundering. So this later performance, it wasn't just revisiting the role.
No, it seems like it was about truly understanding it, embodying it for maybe the first time.
Right.
It suggests that sometimes, life experience itself is what unlocks a performance. You need that mileage.
So what was different this time? Let's get into his specific interpretation of Lear. He had some pretty distinct ideas, didn't he, about Lear's background, his family?
He really did. One of the most striking things was his theory about Lear's wife. He believed she died giving birth to Cordelia. And that loss, that specific loss, shaped everything.
How so?
Well, he felt it led Lear to raise Cordelia almost like a son, a tomboy. But more than that, Hopkins thought Lear was just fundamentally fearful of women, couldn't really understand them because of that early trauma. And that idea, that shaped how he played all those intense family scenes. What do you make of that?
It adds this layer of tragic complexity, I think.
Sure.
It's not just a story about a power-mad king. It's about a man maybe grappling with loss, insecurity, especially in his relationships with women. And he actually agreed with Emily Ronson, who played Goneril.
Right, that the older daughters became monsters, as she put it, partly because of Lear himself.
Yeah, pretty stark look at how parenting, or the lack of it, can echo down the years.
Absolutely. And he saw Lear needing that big, rowdy group of male followers, those all boys together drink fest scenes. He saw that as typical of a certain kind of man from his own background, his generation in Wales, men who struggled to, express affection or even receive it properly. He even connected it to this memory he had, quite a poignant one, of a gathering after Richard Burton died.
Wow. So pulling from very personal observations.
Exactly. Grounds the character even in these huge Shakespearean dramas. Makes it human.
And speaking of grounding it, when he got to Lear's madness, the descent, he used a really disturbing personal memory, didn't he?
He did. Quite difficult, actually. He remembered his father drowning puppies when he was a child. Just a horrific image. And he tapped into that visceral memory for the sheer brokenness of Lear's madness.
How did he connect those?
He felt that Lear, in that fractured state, might look at his loyal friends like Kent or the Fool and see them as vulnerable as those puppies. It really underscores how cruelty, especially to animals, to the defenseless, can just scar you. It stays with you. And it's such a contrast, isn't it, to the controlled menace of someone like Hannibal Lecter.
Totally different energy. Lecter's quiet, contained. This Lear sounds explosive.
Completely. He said his Lear was completely bonkers, even laughed at the storm. A real force of nature unleashed.
And then there's the crown, the horseshoe crown. That's such a specific, unusual detail. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a great story. He got it from a props guy, someone he knew from working on Westworld. And this prop guy told him the horseshoe was from an old horse, apparently born way back in 1925. And Hopkins got quite emotional talking about it. He saw the history of that horse, its power, but also its loneliness, the pain it must have endured. He saw Lear in that horseshoe. It became this really potent symbol for him. He apparently carries it with him.
That's incredible how an object can become a touchstone like that.
It really shows you the depth of connection an actor can find, doesn't it?
It does. And speaking of connections, his own father seems to have been a key part of how he understood Lear, too.
Yes, he described his dad, Dick, as a baker, tough, practical man. But as his father got older, Hopkins saw him change, become more emotional, sometimes prone to anger, even depression. And he drew a direct line from that experience to Lear's own volatility in old age.
So seeing that vulnerability emerge in his own father helped him find it in Lear.
It seems like it. It suggests our understanding of these big themes, aging, loss. It's often filtered through our closest relationships. He also mentioned his relationship with his daughter, Abigail. They're estranged, and he was quite direct about it, basically advising younger people, if your parents are causing you trouble, just move on, protect yourself.
That's very candid. A no-nonsense approach, it seems.
Very much so. Now, something else that was apparently quite pivotal for this Lear was making The Dresser with Ian McKellen.
Right, where he played an actor preparing to play Lear. How did that feed into this?
Well, he said it made him feel at home, like he belonged in the acting world again in a way he hadn't maybe felt for years. Connecting with McKellen, sharing old stories, he felt accepted by the establishment after feeling like an outsider for a long time. And that feeling, that acceptance, seemed to really boost his confidence and solidify his desire to tackle Lear properly.
It's fascinating, though, that he felt so connected to playing Lear, but he famously dislikes the theater itself. Seems like a contradiction.
It does on the surface, yeah. He talked about bad experiences. Walking out of Macbeth early in his career, a really tough run in a play called M. Butterfly. His main issue seems to be this deep dislike of feeling unproductive.
What do you mean by that?
The long rehearsals, the repetition night after night in theater. He just couldn't stand it. He preferred the pace of film, the feeling of getting it done. It just shows, even within acting, people have really different ways they need to work.
That impatience, that drive.
Yeah.
It seems like a core part of him. David Hare apparently noticed this underlying anger in him, even after he quit drinking back in 75.
Yeah, and he shared the story about his mother's advice. She apparently told him, quite bluntly, to be the bastard that you really are.
Wow. Quite the advice.
Right. But he seemed to take it as permission to stop trying to please everyone. He channeled that anger, that intensity into drive, learned to avoid arguments, avoid judging people, just focus his energy. It's like he learned to harness that difficult part of himself, made it a strength.
And that energy doesn't just go into acting, does it? He has these other major creative outlets: painting, music.
Oh, completely vital for him, it seems. His painting, he calls it expressionistic, and said it was influenced by his wife Stella's Colombian background, very vibrant. And his music, his compositions, they've actually been pretty well received. He released an album, Composer. Apparently, Stella encouraged the painting because she saw his script notes. He doodles all over them, and they became these big drawings.
One creative impulse feeding another.
Exactly. Different ways to get it out, to express things.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. What about his views on the wider world, society, politics? What did he say about that in 2018?
He seemed quite detached, honestly. Said he didn't really follow the Trump stuff, didn't vote, had a general distrust of politicians. His view of humanity was kind of long-term. He saw us as being in a messy early stage of evolution, pointed to all the violence of the 20th century.
It's a bit bleak.
Perhaps, or maybe just pragmatic. He actively avoided news and politics, said it was for his own peace of mind, called television junk food for the brain. Much preferred reading, watching old films, trying to focus on things with maybe more lasting value than the day-to-day noise.
That desire for peace keeps coming up. He also touched on the #MeToo movement and his own experiences with difficult people in the industry.
Yeah, he did. He said he knew about Harvey Weinstein's behavior, knew he was rude, a tyrant, and basically avoided him. And Hopkins mentioned times he'd stood up to bullies himself, like a director named John Dexter early on. He supported women speaking out, thought it was right. But he also said he didn't have any desire for, retribution. He seemed more focused on the complexity of people, how they can be both awful and good.
Again, that sense of acceptance, maybe. Moving forward rather than getting stuck in grievance.
I think so. And near the end of the interview, he shared some really lovely reflections on life, on fame. He mentioned Tony Bennett.
What was the connection there?
He quoted Bennett saying, "Life teaches you how to live it if you live long enough." That really resonated with him. And his advice to young actors was basically, don't chase fame, it's empty. The important thing is just to accept life, be grateful you're alive. It's pretty grounded advice from someone who's had so much fame.
Very grounded.
Yeah.
And then there's that photograph he carries.
Yeah.
One of them is a little boy.
Yes. Age 3, on a beach with his father. And he's upset in the photo because he dropped a cough sweet.
Just a tiny little moment. Why is that so important to him?
He said it's a reminder of his whole journey, how far he's come, how improbable it all feels. He thinks about how easily his life could have gone another way, staying in Port Talbot, maybe ending up dead, or working in the bakery like his dad. So that picture of his little self with that tiny disappointment, it anchors him. Reminds him where he started and how, well, inexplicable his current life feels sometimes.
That's a really powerful human way to look back, Sir Anthony Hopkins. His reflections are always so insightful, often quite unexpected.
Absolutely. And his willingness to share those vulnerabilities, the difficult memories, the lessons learned,
Hmm.
it gives you such a richer picture, not just of his acting, but of, well, the human condition, really.
Definitely. And his thoughts on things like anger, creativity, acceptance.
Mm.
There's a lot there for all of us, I think. Hopefully, this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the man behind those incredible performances.
Yeah, it really highlights the complex, thoughtful person whose own life is so deeply woven into his art.
See you next time on Spotlight Chronicles.